My name is Zach Davidson, and for most of my life, I prided myself on being the kind of man who could see trouble coming before it arrived. I spent years in military intelligence, tracking threats, predicting enemy movements, dismantling operations before they could unfold. It was my job to stay 10 steps ahead, to anticipate betrayal before it had a chance to strike. But for all my training, all my instincts, I never saw it coming from the one person I trusted most, my wife, Kate. At first, it was just a feeling, a whisper of doubt in the back of my mind. The late nights at work, the hushed phone calls, the way she angled her screen away when I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into it. But then I overheard something, one conversation, one careless slip, and suddenly, I wasn't just a husband with suspicions, I was a target. She wasn't just cheating. She and the man I once called my best friend were planning something far worse. They weren't just trying to leave me. They were trying to destroy me. They thought I wouldn't see it coming. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I never thought betrayal would come from the person I trusted most. In my line of work, deception was an expected hazard, something I was trained to recognize, analyze, and counter. But I had made one crucial mistake. I let my guard down where it mattered most. I had spent years in military intelligence, predicting enemy movements, dismantling covert operations, and securing national interests, yet somehow I had failed to see the war brewing in my own home. Kate and I had been married for 6 years. She was sharp, independent, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that had drawn me in from the start. I had met her just after leaving the service, back when I was still adjusting to civilian life. She had been my anchor, my transition into a world that no longer operated on strict protocols and classified briefings. We built a life together, at least that's what I thought. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. The late nights at work, the secretive glances at her phone, the subtle shift in her tone whenever she mentioned Mark Langley. Mark had once been a brother to me. We had served together, bled together, and saved each other's lives more times than I could count. After leaving the military, he moved into private security contracting, a lucrative but morally gray business. We kept in touch over the years, but our paths had diverged. While I had chosen stability, Mark thrived in chaos. He had always been the risk taker, the one who played the game on the edge of the knife. I should have known he wouldn't hesitate to stab me in the back when given the opportunity. It started with a feeling, that nagging sense that something was off. Kate had always been meticulous, but recently she had become even more guarded. She had new habits, subtle but noticeable. She started keeping her phone face down at all times. The way she responded to texts became different, shorter, more careful, as if she was trying not to reveal too much. If I walked into a room while she was typing, she would lock the screen a little too quickly, as if by reflex. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Marriages go through phases, right? People get busy, distracted, but deep down I knew better. My instincts, the same ones that had kept me alive in the field, were screaming at me to pay attention. One night, we were at a dinner party hosted by one of her colleagues. A casual evening, drinks, laughter, meaningless small talk. I was halfway through my second glass of whiskey when I caught a glimpse of her stepping away from the group, phone pressed to her ear. I wasn't the type to eavesdrop, but the tension in her posture made me pause. She wasn't relaxed, wasn't laughing or smiling the way she did when catching up with a friend. She was pacing slightly, head tilted down, voice low. I took a step closer, just enough to catch the tail end of her conversation. She was doesn't suspect a thing. We just have to wait a little longer. The words hit like a detonation, sharp and irreversible. My heartbeat didn't spike, my hands didn't tremble. I had trained myself out of those reactions long ago. Instead, my mind sharpened, assessing variables, calculating probabilities. She wasn't talking about a surprise party. She wasn't planning a romantic getaway. Whatever it was, it involved deception, and I was the one being deceived. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I had spent too many years watching targets blow their cover by acting on impulse. I needed information. That night, as Kate slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Pieces of the past few months began rearranging themselves into something I couldn't ignore. The increase in her work trips, the new passwords on her devices, the way she angled her phone away whenever I was near, Mark's sudden reappearance in our lives after years of barely staying in touch. Doubt is a slow poison. It drips into your thoughts, one drop at a time, until you can't ignore the taste of it anymore. I told myself I was being paranoid, that after years of working in intelligence, my brain was wired to see threats where there were none. But paranoia doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping you alive. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had changed. I kissed her goodbye, told her I'd be working late, and watched as she left for the day. Then I got to work. My training had given me access to tools most people didn't even know existed. Cloning a phone, intercepting messages, tracking locations. These were standard procedures in my old world. I started small, monitoring her calls, reading through her messages. At first, there was nothing. Just work emails, casual conversations, nothing overtly suspicious. But I knew better than to look at the surface. The real secrets were always buried deeper. It wasn't until I accessed her deleted messages that I found what I was looking for. She hadn't just been deleting texts. She had been erasing entire conversations. Conversations with Mark. They were careful, speaking in vague terms, never using names, but the meaning was clear. References to the plan, mentions of assets, moving funds, ensuring he didn't find out. This wasn't just an affair. They weren't just sneaking around behind my back, betraying our marriage. They were orchestrating something designed to ruin me. I read through each message slowly, methodically, forcing myself to absorb every word. The details were vague, but the intent was clear. They were waiting for the right moment, for something to be finalized, for me to be out of the way. A normal man might have confronted them right away. He might have screamed, demanded answers, broken things in a fit of rage. But I wasn't a normal man. I had spent years outthinking enemies far more dangerous than these two. If they wanted to play a game, they had chosen the wrong opponent. I closed her messages, locked my phone, and sat in the quiet of my office. The air felt heavier, charged with something electric. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in, piece by piece, until it fills every empty space inside you. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly. They thought they were in control. They thought I was blind, oblivious, walking straight into whatever trap they had set. They were wrong. I spent the next few days refining my strategy. Reacting with anger would have been a mistake. Confronting them without absolute proof would have given them the upper hand, allowed them to twist the narrative in their favor. I had to be patient, meticulous. I had to think the way I used to when I was dismantling enemy networks. Observe, collect intelligence, identify weaknesses, then strike when they least expected it. The first step was understanding the full scope of what they were planning. Betrayal like this didn't happen in isolation. There were always moving parts, connections, layers beneath the surface. Kate was careful. She had always been the type to cover her tracks, to operate with precision. But no one was perfect. It was only a matter of time before she slipped. I started monitoring her phone in real time, tracking her location without her knowing. I mapped out her routines, paying attention to the deviations, the meetings she didn't mention, the places she visited without explanation. She had been frequenting a boutique law office downtown, the kind that specialized in high-stakes divorces and financial disputes. That told me two things. One, she wasn't just planning to leave me, she was making sure she walked away with as much as she could take. And two, she believed she had already won. Mark, on the other hand, was sloppy. He was used to working in high-risk environments, but he had never been disciplined. He relied on brute force, intimidation, and charm to get what he wanted. Unlike Kate, he wasn't good at covering his tracks. A few well-placed surveillance devices in his apartment and car told me everything I needed to know. He had been talking to someone else, another investor, someone with the resources to make a high-level move. Their conversations were cryptic but clear enough. They weren't just planning to take my money. They were setting me up for something bigger, something that would make it impossible for me to fight back. I started connecting the dots. A sudden increase in my financial activity. Transactions I didn't authorize, accounts I hadn't touched in months, being accessed from unfamiliar locations, false reports filed in my name implicating me in shady business dealings. They weren't just after a divorce settlement. They were trying to destroy my reputation, make sure I was in no position to recover once they were done with me. That was the real betrayal. Not the affair, not the lies, but the calculated effort to erase me from my own life. I kept my behavior unchanged. I kissed Kate goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day when she got home, pretended not to notice the way she carefully chose her words around me. At night, when she fell asleep beside me, I would watch her breathing, memorizing every detail. There was a time when I would have done anything for her. Now, I was planning how to dismantle her entire existence without her realizing it until it was too late. The first crack in their armor came when Kate left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She had always been cautious, but comfort breeds carelessness. I saw the email before she had the chance to close it. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough. Finalized by next week. He won't see it coming. Mark is handling the last piece. I didn't react. I simply walked past her, poured myself a cup of coffee, and left for work as if I hadn't seen anything at all. But inside, something shifted. I had been right to wait. They were accelerating their timeline, which meant I had to accelerate mine. I expanded my surveillance, pulling in resources I hadn't touched in years. Old contacts, favors owed, people who didn't ask questions but got results. I needed bank records, call logs, encrypted messages, anything that would allow me to dismantle them from the inside out. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Kate wasn't just leaving me. She was laundering money through a series of shell accounts. Mark was securing assets under a fake identity. And there was someone else, another name that kept appearing in their transactions, someone pulling the strings from behind the scenes. I had spent my career hunting down people who thought they were untouchable. Kate and Mark had made the mistake of thinking they could outmaneuver me. They had no idea what was coming. I spent the next few days tightening my net around them. Every transaction, every message, every piece of their carefully constructed plan was now in my hands. Kate and Mark thought they were running the show, but they had no idea they were merely playing their roles in something far bigger, something I was now controlling from the shadows. The more I dug, the more I realized just how deeply they had invested in my downfall. The offshore accounts, the falsified documents, the quiet meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, it was all leading to one moment. They were setting up a scenario where I would be painted as unstable, reckless, a liability. Kate's carefully orchestrated narrative was one of a wife trapped in a marriage with a man who had lost his grip on reality, someone too dangerous to be left in control of his own finances or reputation. I let them continue believing they were ahead. That was the trick, making them comfortable, letting them think I was still in the dark. Kate's attitude toward me had changed subtly. She was more patient, more measured, as if she were tolerating me rather than living with me. Mark, on the other hand, had grown bolder. I spotted him near our house more than once, sitting in his car down the street, likely watching to see if I was breaking under the pressure. He was waiting for a reaction, for a sign that I was spiraling. He would get one, but not in the way he expected. The final confirmation came when I intercepted a call between them. Kate's voice was calm, calculated. "Everything is ready. The papers are being processed. He's not even questioning anything, just a little longer." Mark laughed. "Told you he wouldn't see it coming. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." That was all I needed. They had made their move, finalized their plan. Now it was my turn. I spent the next 48 hours rewriting the game. Every account they had created, every fund they had tried to siphon, I redirected. Their documents, the ones they believed would trap me, were now rewritten to implicate them instead. The offshore accounts they had set up in my name, I made sure they were traced back to Kate. The falsified reports Mark had filed? They were now tied directly to his business dealings. Piece by piece, I reversed every move they had made. They thought they were setting fire to my life, but they had only built the pyre they would burn on. Kate walked into the house that night as if nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, played the role of a loving wife a little while longer. I played my part too, smiling, nodding, pretending not to notice the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward the clock as if counting down to something. She had no idea the clock had already run out. I poured us both a drink, set the glass in front of her, and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "I know everything," I said. Her hand froze around the glass, but she recovered quickly, forcing a confused smile. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward slightly. "The accounts, the reports, the meetings. Mark, I know everything, Kate." Her face paled. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, probably to deny it, to play innocent a little longer, but it didn't matter. She was already finished. Mark was finished. They just didn't know it yet. Kate didn't move, didn't speak. For the first time in months, she had no script, no rehearsed excuse to fall back on. The game she thought she was playing had suddenly shifted and she wasn't in control anymore. I watched her carefully, studying the micro-expressions that flickered across her face, the tightening of her jaw, the slight dart of her eyes toward the door, the subtle intake of breath as she calculated her options. She was weighing whether to deny, to plead, to attack, to run. It didn't matter what she chose. The moment she had decided to betray me, her fate had been sealed. She forced a nervous chuckle. "Zach, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're being paranoid." She reached for her glass, but her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it. "What exactly do you think you know?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel it, to sit in the uncertainty, to wonder just how deep I had dug. Then I placed my glass down with deliberate care and met her gaze. "I know about the offshore accounts, the false claims filed in my name, the fake reports meant to make me look unstable. I know about the meetings with your lawyer, the hidden assets, the way you and Mark planned to bleed me dry before leaving me with nothing. And, of course, I know about him." The color drained from her face, and she gripped the edge of the table as if it could anchor her in place. I saw the fight-or-flight response kick in, the way her muscles tensed, the way her breath hitched. Then, just as quickly, she forced herself to relax, plastering on the same cool, indifferent mask she had been wearing for months. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her voice smoother now, more measured. "You've been acting paranoid for weeks, and now you're throwing out wild accusations, offshore accounts, Mark? What are you even talking about?" She was still trying to play the role. Even now, with everything collapsing around her, she thought she could manipulate me, gaslight me into doubting what I knew. It would have worked on a lesser man, but I wasn't one of her weak-willed marks. I was the person who had once mapped out enemy operations with nothing more than fragmented intel and a hunch. I had built an entire career on reading between the lines, on detecting lies before they even left someone's mouth, and right now, Kate was drowning in them. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through the files I had compiled over the past few weeks. A collection of documents, bank statements, emails, and voice recordings. I set the phone on the table and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room. "Everything is ready. The papers are being processed." He's not even questioning anything, just a little longer. Then Kate's response. "He won't see it coming." Her breath came out in a sharp exhale. She didn't even try to deny it this time. Instead, she did what she did best. She recalculated. I could see her mind working, running through potential escape routes. If she couldn't manipulate me into doubting myself, she would try something else. "Okay," she said, sitting back in her chair. The fake confusion was gone now, replaced by something more neutral. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending you're wrong, but, Zach, listen to me. You're looking at this the wrong way." I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "The wrong way?" "Yes," she said quickly, seizing on the moment, sensing an opportunity. "I was never going to go through with it. Mark pushed me into it, made me feel like I didn't have a choice. I was scared, Zach. I knew you'd figure it out, and I was waiting for the right time to tell you." I tilted my head slightly, watching her lie to my face with the same ease she probably used to order coffee. She was good. Too good. The way she softened her tone made her voice tremble just enough to sound genuine, the way she leaned in slightly as if she were bearing some deep, painful truth. It was all calculated. She had spent years perfecting this. But she didn't realize something crucial. I wasn't Mark. I wasn't a fool blinded by lust or greed. I let the silence hang between us for a few beats before leaning forward. You think I don't know you by now? You were never scared, Kate. You were never waiting for the right time to tell me. You enjoyed every second of this. The thrill of it, the deception, the control. You thought you were untouchable. She flinched. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. Enough for me to see that, for the first time, she understood she had lost. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. You and Mark spent months planning to destroy me. But what you didn't realize is that I've been planning something of my own. Her eyes widened slightly, and that was the first time I saw real fear. "What did you do?" she whispered. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out soon enough." Kate's fingers tightened around the glass in front of her, but she didn't drink. She was no longer playing the role of the indifferent wife, no longer pretending she had the upper hand. She knew, just as I did, that the ground beneath her had collapsed. But Kate wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat easily. I could see it in her eyes, the frantic calculations, the desperate search for a way out. She still thought there was an angle she could work, a way to twist this in her favor. It was almost impressive. If I hadn't been the one she was trying to destroy. She swallowed, her throat moving with the effort. "Zach, listen to me. We can fix this." Her voice was softer now, less defensive. She was switching tactics. If manipulation didn't work, maybe appealing to my emotions would. "You don't have to do anything drastic. I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Stop." My voice was calm, measured, but it had the intended effect. She flinched slightly, her mouth snapping shut. "You don't get to control the conversation anymore. You don't get to dictate how this plays out." I let the weight of those words sink in before continuing. "You and Mark thought you were building an empire on the ruins of my life. What you didn't realize was that I was watching, waiting, letting you think you were winning while I dismantled everything you built piece by piece." Her fingers twitched, and she finally lifted the glass to her lips, taking a small sip as if it could steady her. "What did you do?" she asked again, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "For starters, the money, it's gone. Every single dollar you and Mark tried to funnel out of my accounts, every offshore transfer, every hidden asset, it's been redirected. You won't find it, Mark won't find it, and neither will the people he owes." The glass slipped slightly in her grip, and she set it down too quickly, a soft clink echoing in the silence between us. That was the first real sign of panic. I had her full attention now. I continued, voice unwavering. "The falsified reports tying me to illegal activities? They've been traced back to you and Mark instead. Every fake claim, every fabricated document, every false accusation, it's all leading back to you now." I tilted my head slightly, watching her absorb that information. "You were meticulous, I'll give you that. But you underestimated me. You thought you could frame me, discredit me, leave me with nothing while you walked away clean. But now, when the authorities start digging, you're the one they'll be looking at." Her breath came faster now, shallow, controlled only by sheer willpower. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through her head. The plan was unraveling faster than she could process. "You don't understand," she said quickly, shaking her head as if trying to convince herself as much as me. "Mark, he's the one who handled most of this. He's the one who—" I laughed under my breath, a quiet, humorless sound. "I know exactly what Mark did, and that's the best part, because he doesn't know what I did." I checked my watch, the cold satisfaction settling deep in my chest. "In about 10 minutes, he's going to get a visit from some very angry men he's been working with. Men who were promised a lot of money that no longer exists. I imagine that's going to be an interesting conversation for him." Kate's face drained of what little color remained. She knew exactly what that meant. Mark had always been reckless with the kind of people he did business with. He was useful to them when things were going smoothly. But now, with the money gone, he was a liability. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I stood, pushing back my chair slowly. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room, Kate, that no one could outmaneuver you, but you made one mistake. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough. You underestimated me. She sat frozen as I turned and walked away. I didn't need to stay to see what happened next. Her world had already collapsed. She just hadn't realized how deep the wreckage went yet. But she would, soon enough. I didn't look back as I left the house. There was nothing left for me there, nothing worth holding on to. The woman I had once loved, the life we had built together, the trust I had given so freely, it was all gone, shattered beyond repair. Kate was still sitting at the kitchen table when I walked out, her body stiff, her hands gripping the edge of the glass as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. But there was no saving her now. She had spent too long weaving her lies, too long believing that she was the smartest person in the room. Now she was watching everything she had worked for slip through her fingers, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. The night air was sharp against my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat that had been building inside me for weeks. I hadn't realized just how heavy the weight of betrayal had been until I finally let it go. I inhaled deeply, feeling the cold rush of oxygen clear my head, sharpen my focus. The world outside felt different, cleaner, quieter, as if it had been waiting for me to step back into it. My car was parked at the curb right where I had left it, but I didn't get in right away. Instead, I leaned against the hood, rolling my shoulders, exhaling slowly. There was still one last thing I needed to confirm. I glanced at my watch, my pulse steady, my mind calculating. If everything had gone according to plan, Mark Langley was currently learning just how deep of a grave he had dug for himself. I pictured it clearly. Mark, sitting in his overpriced high-rise apartment, legs stretched out, maybe swirling a glass of whiskey in one hand, convinced that he was on the brink of victory. He probably thought he was untouchable, that Kate had played her part perfectly, that within days I would be out of the picture for good, my accounts drained, my reputation destroyed. He had no idea that the walls were already closing in. That the empire he thought he was building was nothing more than a house of cards, waiting for the right gust of wind to send it crashing down. And then, the knock at the door. I could almost hear the moment of hesitation, the brief pause before Mark, always so sure of himself, opened it, expecting to see one of his business associates, maybe even Kate. Instead, he would be greeted by the men he had been working with, the ones who had fronted him the capital he needed to pull off his little scheme. The same men who had been promised payouts that no longer existed. Men who, unlike me, didn't have the patience for deception. I knew exactly how it would go. Mark would try to buy himself time, try to spin some excuse about how things were just delayed, how the money would be there soon, but it wouldn't matter. I had made sure of that. Every offshore account he had used, every wire transfer, every bit of stolen money, gone. Redirected, seized, frozen. As far as his investors were concerned, he had taken their money and burned it to ash. A vibration in my pocket pulled me from my thoughts. I pulled out my phone, glancing at the screen. A message from one of my contacts. It's dumb. 2 simple words, but they carried the weight of finality. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting it settle in. This was the end of the road for Mark Langley. Whether or not he would walk away from it depended entirely on how much mercy his former business partners were willing to show him. I wasn't betting on much. Sliding my phone back into my pocket, I finally moved toward the driver's side door, but I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the quiet hum of the night. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for weeks was gone, replaced by something lighter, something clearer. Kate would try to recover, I had no doubt about that. She would scramble, she would panic, she would do everything in her power to salvage what little remained of her life. Maybe she would try to run, maybe she would try to fight. But it wouldn't matter. By the time the authorities finished combing through the financial records, she would be buried under fraud investigations, legal battles, and frozen assets. Everything she had tried to do to me would be turned against her, and there was no escape. Her reputation? Shattered. Her future? Gone. And the best part? I wouldn't have to lift another finger. Kate had always thought she was a step ahead of everyone, that she could manipulate, deceive, and come out unscathed, but she had underestimated me. She had believed I was just another obstacle to remove, another man she could play. What she hadn't realized was that I was never the one playing defense. I had let her make her moves, let her believe she was winning, all while setting up my own endgame. Now, I didn't need to see her fall apart. I didn't need her tears, her apologies, her desperate attempts to salvage what was already lost. The only thing I needed was to leave her exactly where she had left me, alone, blindsided, drowning in the consequences of her own actions. I checked my watch one last time before turning the key in the ignition. The engine purred to life, steady and smooth. The road stretched out ahead of me, open and empty, a clean slate waiting to be written on. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. The past was behind me, and for the first time, the future was mine again.